So I just finished reading the trade paperback of the Captain America trade paperback, as you can see, and it collects Captain America issues number 332 to 350 and Iron Man number 228. And I'll get to why Iron Man's included in this in a little bit. But anyway, I thought the book was fantastic. It's definitely on my top five favorite stories that I've read and that I own. And, well, basically, what it's about is the government calls Steve Rogers in, and they say that in order to remain Captain America, he has to follow the government's orders. So he'd pretty much be the government's hitman, much like the way it is in the Ultimate universe. And I despise the Ultimate Universe, by the way. So, faced with that decision, Captain America, Steve Rogers, decides that he's going to stop being Captain America because if he just works for the government, it goes against his code of honor, in a way. So he turns in the uniform and the shield, and the government is forced to try and find someone else to take his place. And before they do that, well, during the time when they were talking to Steve Rogers about this situation, something was going on in Washington, D.C., where John Walker, at the moment known as the Super Patriot, decides to help out. And what happened was there was a terrorist that was on the Washington Monument that threatened to launch a nuke if America didn't declare war on somebody already. The reason for that is because that guy felt that if America doesn't declare war on anyone, then it shows that America is weak. And I'm surprised a lot of people haven't said that already. Well, in real life, but then again, it's kind of like that in a way. But I'm not going to get into that. Anyway, the super patriot John Walker stops him, and that gives him recognition, and the government notices him, and they make an offer to him about taking Steve Rogers' place, which he's glad to do because he feels that Steve Rogers is kind of outdated for the generation. And so they tell him he can have a partner, so he calls in three of his buddies. And, well, the government does a background check on all of them. And they let John Walker be Captain America, and they let his friend Lamar be his partner, Bucky. And they turn the other two away because they don't have good backgrounds. So John Walker and Lamar start training in order to get ready for field missions. And, well, they have their own little problems. Like, John Walker doesn't think he can be as good as Steve Rogers as Captain America, but he keeps trying. And it's noticeable that he has trouble with the shield, so they sorry. So they call Taskmaster in to train him with that. And they also have to work with the Freedom Force. And for those of you that don't know who the Freedom Force is, it's just a government X-Men, I guess you could say. It consists of Stonewall, the Blob, Mystique, Pyro, and I kind of forgot if there's anyone else. But anyway, those are the main ones that people know about to begin with. And of course, John Walker and Lamar don't get along well with them. Not because they're mutants, but just because they're, bad guys. Oh, now I remember. I think it was Destiny. I think she was a member of the Freedom Force. But anyway, back to what I was talking about. So, while John Walker and Lamar are just getting trained, Steve Rogers is just has just disappeared because he's just trying to find himself because he doesn't know what to do now since he's not Captain America. And while he's just traveling around, he runs into this guy they call Brother Nature, who apparently has the power to control not the weather, but I guess kind of I guess he could just control nature. Like during the fight with Steve Rogers, he sends some deer after him. He causes an earthquake. He causes some wind. So I guess he just controls nature. But anyway, what happens with that is that Brother Nature gets injured and Steve Rogers has to help him. And while he's helping, they talk about why they are the way they are now. And Brother Nature says that he became Brother Nature because he didn't like that people were destroying the land, and he kept trying to stop them from doing that, as like sabotaging trucks, bulldozers, equipment, everything like that. And Steve mentions that he gave up being Captain America because of because of the government. And while that's happening, um, three of Steve Rogers' friends are looking for him, and the three friends are the Falcon, Sam Wilson, um, Nomad, Jack Monroe, and Demolition Man, aka D-Man, Dennis Murphy, I think. And, well, Nomad and D-Man don't really get along that well, mainly because Nomad feels that D-Man is hitting on his girlfriend Vagabond, which kind of does happen later on. But anyway, they do find Steve Rogers and they convince him to become not Captain America. He becomes the Captain, which is the red, white, and black uniform you see on the left, which will become the U.S. agent's uniform in the future, who will also be John Walker, but that's another story. And so they go around, they go to Las Vegas, they fight the Serpent Society, stop they stop the Serpent Society from, well, actually no, they don't really stop it, but I guess they kind of reverse it. Okay, alright, what happens is that the Serpent Society poisons the water in Washington, D.C. that turns anyone who drinks it into a kind of snake-like. So they're able to reverse that, and well, so they save Washington, D.C. And while that was happening, the president at the time, Ronald Reagan in the book, drank some water and he became snake-like. So Steve Rogers had to kind of defend himself against him when he was trying to stop the Viper. And, well, the way he was able to get the president to turn back into normal was to make him sweat a lot. But I'd rather not get too into that. But anyway, back to John Walker. What happens is, at first, he's doing okay. I mean, he's not doing as good as Steve Rogers is as Captain America. But then things start going wrong, and it starts right when the two friends that were turned away for the background checks return, and they reveal, the public identity of Captain America as John Walker. And that ends up leading to some bad stuff, because earlier on in the story, John Walker had to deal with this group called the Watchdogs in his hometown. And what the Watchdogs is, I guess you could say, well, they're extremists, definitely that. They start, well, anything they think is bad, they're going to destroy. Hard to say. Like in the book, they burn down an adult shop. They try, well, anything that they deem as immoral, they just take down. And while that was happening at first, John Walker and Lamar had to go undercover, and John Walker was initiated into the watchdog group. And then when the John Walker's two ex-friends, who are the left and the right wingers, reveal that he's Captain America, the watchdogs decide to get revenge by kidnapping John Walker's parents and holding them hostage until John Walker arrives to sacrifice himself. And he believes he could save his parents, like right when the watchdogs decide to kill him. And I guess you could say he almost does, but his parents end up getting shot, and he starts to go crazy, and he kills a few of the members of the watchdogs, critically injures some of them, and well, he's obviously just snapped. Oh, and I forgot to mention that Lamar, the Bucky for John Walker's Captain America, later becomes Battlestar in the book, and the reason for that is because while um while Steve Rogers was doing a mission, John Walker and Lamar arrive a little late, and Lamar talks to a SHIELD agent, and he convinces Lamar to be called another identity because Bucky was white and Lamar is black, and because Lamar is actually taller than John Walker. So he becomes Battlestar. And I suppose right here is kind of where I should mention how Iron Man comes into play. They have a tie-in of the armor wars that were going on at the time, where Tony Stark was just trying to go after any armored weapons in a way, just to make sure they didn't steal his technology and all that. And yeah, that happens. Him and Steve Rogers have a fight. Then it just kind of goes away. Of course, it comes back in another book, just not in this one. And anyway, back to John Walker. Even though he went crazy, the government still decides to keep him on, and he ends up going crazy still, killing a few more bad guys and things like that. And later on, Flag Smasher, the leader of Ultimatum, comes into play, and apparently he's in trouble because his troops are starting to attack him because he turned against something that was happening, which I'll get into later. And well, what happens is that Flag Smasher built a bomb that was gonna pretty much nuke the world, and he wanted to stop it before it went off, so he decides to call Captain America, which he tries doing, and they send John Walker after him, and Flag Smasher and him have a fight, but Flag Smasher realizes it's not Steve Rogers, so he decides to just kind of torture John Walker by submerging half of him in the freezing water until Steve Rogers arrives, and then they work together with Battlestar and D-Man to try and stop the bomb. And well, right when that happens, Battlestar is with John Walker trying to get him to a warmer place because of frostbite and all that. And Demolition Man, D-Man, sorry I keep going back and forth with him, D-Man, Flag Smasher, and Steve Rogers decide to go after the bomb. And they can't deactivate it in time, so Rogers asks D-Man to crash the Quinjet they were in into the bomb to stop it, which D-Man tries doing, but two of the Ultimatum troops put a bomb on the Quinjet, and well, D-Man couldn't escape, but the bomb is stopped. But anyway, what happens is after that, Steve Rogers returns, and starts to realize that the the government didn't really ask the president if they could, well, if they could actually fire him or not. So he decides to go talk to the guy that did fire him in a way. And when they talk, the the guy that fired him dies and his skull turns red, and well, I'm sure you can see where that goes. And turns out that the Red Skull, who is in a cloned body of Steve Rogers, um, started all this, getting Steve Rogers fired, putting John Walker as Captain America, and things like that. And then Steve Rogers and John Walker end up fighting, which Steve kind of wanted to do to prove himself, because earlier on in a different story they fought before, and not really going to say Steve lost, but I guess, okay, yeah, I guess he lost. So he beats John Walker, and then he just kind of starts talking to the Red Skull, who he's getting suspicious of because, well, when they're talking, the Red Skull has a cigarette in his mouth, and Steve wonders why he's not inhaling, and then Walker throws the shield at the Red Skull's, well, behind the Red Skull's knees, and the dust of death, what the Red Skull uses to turn people's skulls red, backfires on him and turns his face back into a red skull. And yeah, so they find out about that. The government decides to talk, well, the council really decides to talk to Steve and John, and they offer Steve the mantle of Captain America back, but he says he won't do it and that they should find someone else. But then John chases after him and says that it was a bad idea from the start of replacing Steve, and that only he can be Captain America. So Steve decides to take it back in the end, and John Walker later becomes the U.S. agent, and well, yeah, that kind of stuff happens. Also in the book, it has a kind of a little list of Steve's partners and the girls in his life, his enemies, and it also has the resurrection story of the Red Skull. And what happened in that is that Zola, the robot guy with the face in his torso, just transfers the Red Skull's mind into a clone body of Steve Rogers, and the Red Skull starts talking about his past in order to remember who he was in a sense. And yeah, that's what happens in that. Sorry that this review wasn't exactly as good as my others, even though those aren't good to begin with, but I was just kind of in a rush at the time, so forgive me for that. But anyway, have a nice day.